In a peaceful village on the outskirts of Nairobi, there lived a man named Juma. This village was small, with dusty roads and houses made of mud and straw. People in the village knew one another well, and their lives were simple. They worked together, laughed together, and helped one another when times were hard. But amidst this close-knit community, Juma was an outsider. Juma had always been different. He lived alone in a small, rundown house at the far edge of the village. His roof leaked when it rained, and the walls were covered in dirt. He never bothered to clean up. He was known by everyone, but not because they liked him. He had no friends, no family, and no one who cared for him. Juma was a man who didn't care much about himself. His clothes were always dirty, his hair was matted, and his body had a smell that made people turn away. He worked all the time, carrying heavy loads and doing odd jobs for the villagers. But while Juma helped others, he never helped himself. He was always so focused on work that he forgot to take care of his own needs. The villagers whispered about him. Some said Juma was strange, while others simply laughed at his appearance. No one ever took the time to get to know him. They saw his dirty clothes and smelly body, and that was enough for them to avoid him. Juma, however, didn't seem to notice or care. One morning, as the sun rose over the village, Juma woke up like he did every day. His bones ached from sleeping on his hard bed, and his stomach growled with hunger. But instead of eating or taking care of himself, Juma got up and prepared for another long day of work. He picked up his tools and headed out into the village. As he walked down the street, people moved aside to avoid him. Children pointed and giggled, while adults covered their noses. But Juma was used to it. He didn't mind that people kept their distance. In fact, he liked being left alone. His mind was always on his work, and he had no time for anything else. For years, Juma lived his life this way, working every day without rest. He carried heavy bags of grain, chopped wood for cooking fires, and fixed broken roofs. The villagers appreciated his hard work, but none of them offered to help him in return. They were content to let Juma do the hard labor, while they stayed away from his unkempt appearance. As the days passed, Juma's body grew weaker. He was getting older, but he refused to slow down. His muscles ached, and he often felt dizzy from exhaustion. Yet he never stopped working. He thought that as long as he kept busy, everything would be fine. One day, as Juma was working in the hot sun, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He stopped for a moment, clutching his shirt, but then shook his head and continued working. He didn't have time to rest. He had to finish the job. But the pain didn't go away. It kept coming back, stronger and more frequent, until Juma could barely lift his tools. Even then, Juma ignored the signs. He thought he could push through the pain, just like he always had. But his body was reaching its limit, and soon, Juma would learn a hard lesson. One afternoon, while working on the roof of a house, Juma's legs gave out. His body, tired and worn from years of neglect, couldn't take it anymore. He fell from the roof and landed hard on the ground. The villagers rushed over, but when they saw it was Juma, they hesitated. "He smells so bad," one person said, wrinkling their nose. "We should help him, but I don't want to get too close," another whispered. In the end, no one offered him a hand. Juma, in pain and unable to move, was left lying on the ground. Eventually, he managed to crawl back to his house, where he collapsed on his bed, too weak to get up. As the days passed, Juma's condition worsened. He was too sick to work and too weak to take care of himself. His body ached and his cough grew worse. He was burning with fever, but there was no one to help him. The villagers had heard that Juma was sick, but none of them wanted to get close to him. They were afraid of his illness and even more afraid of his smell. Juma was left alone in his tiny, dirty house. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the silence was unbearable. For the first time in his life, Juma realized how lonely he truly was. As he lay in bed, Juma had plenty of time to think. He thought about his life, about the choices he had made, and about the people who had avoided him. He had worked so hard for others, but he had never taken the time to care for himself. Now, when he needed help the most, no one was willing to come to his aid. Juma felt a deep sadness in his heart. He realized that he had pushed people away, not just with his dirty appearance, but with his attitude. He had always kept to himself, never reaching out for friendship or kindness. Now, he was paying the price. While most of the villagers stayed away from Juma, there was one person who couldn't ignore him. Her name was Aisha, and she lived next door to Juma. Aisha was kind-hearted and generous, and she had always noticed Juma's hard work. Unlike the others, she didn't judge him for his appearance or smell. She knew there was more to Juma than what people saw on the outside. One evening, as the sun began to set, Aisha decided to visit Juma. She knocked on his door, but there was no answer. Concerned, she pushed the door open and found Juma lying in bed, weak and sick. Aisha looked at Juma and knew that he needed help. She didn't care about the smell or the dirt. She saw a man who was suffering, and her heart ached for him. Without hesitation, she set to work. She cleaned his house, brought him food, and stayed by his side, nursing him back to health. Juma was shocked by Aisha's kindness. No one had ever cared for him like this before. He didn't understand why she was helping him, but he was too weak to ask. With Aisha's care, Juma slowly began to recover. His fever broke, and his strength returned bit by bit. Aisha made sure he ate healthy meals and drank plenty of water. She also encouraged him to wash himself and wear clean clothes. At first, Juma resisted. He had never cared about cleanliness before. But Aisha was gentle and patient, and eventually Juma began to listen. Each day, Aisha helped Juma take small steps toward taking better care of himself. She would bring him a bowl of water to wash his face and hands, and she would lay out clean clothes for him to wear. As the days turned into weeks, Juma's appearance started to change. His hair was no longer matted, and his skin, once covered in dirt, now shone with cleanliness. His clothes, once tattered and filthy, were now neat and fresh. People in the village started to notice the difference, but they couldn't believe it was Juma. How did he change so much? They whispered among themselves. Aisha had worked a small miracle. But it wasn't just Juma's outside that was changing. His heart was changing too. With Aisha's help, Juma began to see the world differently. He realized that he had been living in darkness, pushing people away without even knowing it. Aisha's kindness had opened his eyes. He no longer wanted to be the dirty, lonely man that everyone avoided. He wanted to be someone worthy of love and friendship. For the first time in his life, Juma began to take pride in his appearance. He woke up each morning and washed his face, combed his hair, and put on clean clothes. He started to care about how he looked and how he felt. As Juma embraced this new way of living, something remarkable happened. His confidence grew. He started walking through the village with his head held high. No longer did he shy away from people or hide in the shadows. He smiled at the villagers, greeted them warmly, and began to notice the world around him in a way he hadn't before. People in the village were amazed by the change in Juma. The man they once avoided had become someone they admired. His transformation was more than physical. It was as though he had discovered a new spirit within himself. Juma had never felt so alive. During this time, Aisha and Juma's bond deepened. They spent more time together, talking about their lives, their dreams, and the future. Aisha had always been kind to Juma, but now their friendship grew into something stronger. They began to trust each other in ways that neither of them had experienced before. Juma found himself looking forward to the moments they shared. He had never had a true friend, and Aisha's companionship was a source of joy and peace for him. Aisha, too, saw a new side of Juma, a man who was gentle, thoughtful, and eager to learn. The villagers couldn't stop talking about Juma's transformation. Some were happy for him, impressed by how he had turned his life around. Others were skeptical, wondering how someone like Juma could change so much. A few even speculated that Aisha had used magic to clean him up. "Do you think she bewitched him?" one woman whispered to her friend as they watched Juma walk by. "It's impossible for someone to change that much on their own," her friend replied. But Aisha and Juma didn't pay attention to the gossip. They were too focused on the friendship they were building. And for the first time in his life, Juma felt like he truly belonged. Juma's life now had a sense of structure and purpose. Instead of working from morning till night without any rest, he began to set a schedule for himself. He would work in the mornings, carrying out small tasks for the villagers, and in the afternoons, he would take time to relax, enjoy a meal, and spend time with Aisha. The villagers were surprised to see Juma working at a slower pace, but they couldn't deny that he seemed happier and healthier. He had more energy, and the work he did was of even better quality than before. People began to seek him out, asking for his help with different tasks. Now that Juma was stronger, he wanted to give back to the people who had once helped him. He began to offer his assistance to his neighbors, fixing broken fences, helping with heavy lifting, and offering advice on tasks they were struggling with. The villagers, who had once avoided him, were now grateful for his help. Aisha noticed the way Juma's spirit of generosity grew. He no longer worked just for survival. He worked to help others. His heart was full of kindness, and he wanted to make a positive impact in the village. One day, as Juma was helping a neighbor fix a broken cart, the man remarked, "You've changed a lot, Juma. We hardly recognize you anymore." Juma smiled and glanced at Aisha, who was standing nearby, watching with pride. "I owe it all to Aisha," he said. "She taught me how to take care of myself. She made me see that I deserve better than the life I was living." The man nodded thoughtfully. "You're lucky to have her in your life." Juma knew the man was right. Aisha had been his guiding light, and he was grateful for everything she had done for him. As time went on, Juma and Aisha's relationship deepened. Their friendship was built on trust and mutual respect, but something else was growing between them, something neither of them had expected. Juma found himself thinking about Aisha more and more. He admired her strength, her kindness, and the way she had seen the good in him when no one else had. Aisha, too, began to feel differently about Juma. She had always seen him as a friend, but now her heart fluttered when she saw him. She couldn't deny that her feelings for him were becoming more than just friendship. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Juma and Aisha sat outside, enjoying the cool breeze. They had spent the day working together in the garden, planting vegetables and tending to the flowers. There was a peaceful silence between them, but Juma could feel something stirring in his heart. "Aisha," he said quietly, turning to her, "I've been meaning to tell you something." Aisha looked at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "What is it, Juma?" Juma hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "You've changed my life in ways I can't even describe. You've shown me kindness, care, and friendship, but I've realized that I care for you in a way that goes beyond friendship. I think I'm falling in love with you." Aisha's heart skipped a beat as she listened to Juma's confession. She had known, deep down, that her feelings for him were growing, but hearing him say the words made her realize just how much she cared for him, too. She smiled softly and reached for his hand. "Juma, I felt the same way for a while now. You've become someone very special to me, and I can't imagine my life without you." Juma's heart soared with happiness. For the first time in his life, he had found love, a love that was built on friendship, kindness, and mutual respect. He knew that Aisha was the one person who had always seen the best in him, and he was determined to cherish her forever. As their love deepened, Juma knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Aisha. One evening, after a long day of work, Juma gathered his courage and decided to ask her a question that had been on his mind for days. "Aisha," he said, taking her hand in his, "you've been my friend, my guide, and my love. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Aisha's eyes filled with tears of joy as she nodded. "Yes, Juma, I will marry you." The news of Juma and Aisha's engagement spread quickly through the village. People were both surprised and delighted. The man they had once avoided had now become someone they respected, and they were happy to see him find love. Some couldn't believe that Juma, who had once been so dirty and unloved, was now going to marry the kindest woman in the village. Others admired the love story that had blossomed between the two, knowing that it was a testament to the power of kindness and transformation. As the wedding day approached, the entire village came together to help with the preparations. The women gathered to make dresses, the men built tables and chairs for the celebration, and the children helped by picking flowers to decorate the ceremony. Aisha was overjoyed by the support of her community. She had always been loved by the villagers, but now she saw how much they had come to respect and care for Juma as well. On the night before the wedding, Juma sat quietly in his home, reflecting on how much his life had changed. He thought about the man he had once been, lonely, dirty, and uncared for, and the man he had become. He was no longer the outcast of the village. He had found love, friendship, and purpose. Juma knew he owed everything to Aisha. She had seen the goodness in him when no one else had. She had shown him that he deserved love and happiness, and for that, he would be forever grateful. The day of the wedding arrived, and the village was alive with excitement. The sun shone brightly, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers. Juma stood at the front of the ceremony, dressed in clean, well-fitting clothes, waiting for Aisha. When Aisha appeared, dressed in a beautiful gown, Juma's heart swelled with love. She was the most beautiful person he had ever seen, and he knew in that moment that he was the luckiest man in the world. As Juma and Aisha stood before the villagers, they exchanged vows of love and commitment. They promised to support one another, to care for each other, and to face life's challenges together. The villagers cheered, knowing that this was a union built on something rare and precious. Juma, once a man who had been so alone, had now found his place in the world. He had found love, not just in Aisha, but in the community that had once turned away from him. After the wedding vows were exchanged, the village erupted in celebration. Music filled the air, and everyone gathered around to dance and feast. There was laughter and joy all around, and for the first time in years, Juma felt truly connected to the people of the village. The villagers who had once kept their distance from him now welcomed him with open arms. They congratulated him, shook his hand, and shared stories of how much he had changed. Juma couldn't help but smile at how far he had come. As Aisha stood beside Juma, watching the celebration unfold, her heart was filled with happiness. She had always believed in Juma, even when no one else had. Now, seeing him surrounded by the people who once avoided him, she knew that their love had made a difference, not just in his life, but in the entire village. She squeezed Juma's hand, and he smiled back at her, knowing that this was just the beginning of their journey together. The days following the wedding were full of new beginnings. Juma and Aisha moved into a small but cozy house near the heart of the village. The house was filled with warmth and love, a true reflection of their bond. They spent their days working side by side in the garden, cooking meals together and planning for their future. Juma was no longer the lonely man who worked himself to exhaustion. He had a purpose now, to build a life with Aisha and to continue growing into the man he had become. Every day felt like a gift, and Juma cherished each moment. As time went on, Juma became a beloved member of the village. People no longer whispered about him or avoided him on the street. Instead, they sought his advice, invited him to gatherings, and treated him like family. Juma had finally found the acceptance he had longed for, and it filled him with a sense of peace. He no longer felt like an outsider. He belonged here in this village with Aisha by his side. Aisha continued to be a constant source of support for Juma. Whenever he had doubts or felt overwhelmed by the changes in his life, she was there to reassure him. Her patience and kindness never wavered, and Juma knew that he could always count on her. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Juma turned to Aisha and said, "You've changed my life in ways I can never repay. I don't know what I would have done without you." Aisha smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "You've changed your own life, Juma. I just helped you see the person you've always been." As the seasons passed, Juma and Aisha's love only grew stronger. They shared everything, joys, sorrows, and the simple moments that made life beautiful. Their connection was deep, built on trust, respect, and a genuine understanding of one another. Juma often marveled at how lucky he was to have found Aisha. She had not only saved him from a life of loneliness, but had also given him a sense of purpose and happiness that he had never known before. Though their life was filled with love, Juma and Aisha faced their fair share of challenges. There were difficult days when work was hard and the crops didn't grow as expected. There were times when Juma doubted himself, wondering if he truly deserved the happiness he had found. But through it all, Aisha stood by his side. She reminded him that life wasn't about being perfect. It was about growing, learning, and facing each challenge together. One day, as Juma and Aisha worked in their garden, a young boy from the village approached them. He looked shy and nervous, and Juma recognized the same loneliness in the boy that he had once felt. The boy, named Kito, explained that he didn't have many friends and that people often teased him for being different. Juma listened carefully, remembering his own experiences. He knew what it felt like to be ignored and ridiculed. "Come and work with us," Juma said kindly. "You'll always have a place here." Kito began visiting Juma and Aisha regularly. He helped them in the garden, and in return, they offered him guidance and friendship. Juma took Kito under his wing, teaching him about hard work and self-respect. As their friendship grew, Kito began to change, just as Juma had. He became more confident, and the villagers, seeing the kindness Juma had shown him, started treating Kito with more respect. Juma realized that the kindness Aisha had shown him was now rippling out into the community. By helping Kito, he was continuing the cycle of compassion that had saved his own life. He understood that the smallest acts of kindness could create the greatest changes. Aisha watched with pride as Juma became a mentor to the boy. She knew that Juma's journey had come full circle. He had gone from being the lonely, misunderstood man to someone who could offer hope and support to others. As the years went by, Juma and Aisha's life continued to flourish. Their garden thrived, Their home was filled with warmth, and their love remained as strong as ever. The villagers often spoke of them with admiration, calling their story one of the greatest transformations the village had ever seen. Juma had not only changed his own life, but had also become a symbol of hope for the entire village. People who once judged him now looked to him for inspiration. One evening, as Juma and Aisha sat by the fire, Juma reflected on how far he had come. He thought about the days when he had been sick, lonely, and ignored by the village. He thought about how Aisha had come into his life and changed everything. "Aisha," he said softly, "I've been thinking about the past, and I realize now that everything led me to you. All the struggles, all the hard days, they were worth it because they brought me to where I am today." Aisha smiled, her eyes shining with love. "And I'm so glad they did, Juma. You've become the man you were always meant to be." Juma's transformation continued to be a source of admiration for the village. People often came to him for advice, and he always took the time to listen. He had learned that kindness and patience were the most valuable things he could offer. Even the children, who once teased him, now looked up to him as a role model. Juma had earned the respect of the entire village, and he wore that respect with humility. As Juma and Aisha grew older, they began to focus more on teaching the younger generation. They started hosting small gatherings at their home, where they shared stories and lessons about life, kindness, and the importance of community. Juma often told the story of how he had been sick and alone, and how Aisha's kindness had saved him. The young people listened eagerly, learning the importance of caring for one another. Juma's story had an impact far beyond his own life. The village, once divided by gossip and judgment, had become more united. People were kinder to one another, quicker to offer help, and slower to judge. Juma and Aisha had set an example for the entire community, showing that love and kindness could transform lives and bring people together. As Juma and Aisha grew older, they began to think about the legacy they would leave behind. They knew that their story would be passed down through generations, and they hoped that it would inspire others to be kind, patient, and loving. They had built a life full of love, not just for each other, but for the entire village. Their story was one of transformation, not only for Juma, but for everyone who had been touched by their kindness. Juma and Aisha's later years were filled with peace and contentment. They spent their days tending to their garden, teaching the village children, and enjoying the quiet moments together. Their love had stood the test of time, and their lives were rich with meaning. They often reflected on how far they had come, from Juma's lonely, difficult days to the beautiful life they had built together. It was a life well lived, full of love, joy, and connection. As Juma sat on the porch of their home one evening, watching the sunset, he thought about the man he had once been. He had been so focused on work that he had forgotten to take care of himself. He had pushed people away without even realizing it. But now he saw things differently. He had learned that life wasn't just about survival. It was about love, kindness, and community. He knew that without Aisha's love, he would never have discovered the happiness he had now. Juma and Aisha's story became a part of the village's history. It was told and retold to the younger generations, a reminder of how love and kindness could change everything. The children grew up hearing about Juma's transformation and the power of Aisha's compassion. The village had been transformed by their love, and the lessons they had shared continued to shape the community for years to come. One day, as Juma and Aisha sat together, they realized that the most important lesson they had learned was that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Juma had been broken, both physically and emotionally, but Aisha's love had brought him back to life. They knew that this was the lesson they wanted to leave with the village, the idea that kindness, patience, and love were the most powerful forces in the world. In their final years, Juma and Aisha lived a peaceful life, surrounded by the love and respect of the village. They had built a beautiful life together, one filled with happiness, understanding, and deep connection. Though they had faced many challenges, they had overcome them all through the power of their love. The story of Juma and Aisha teaches us that kindness can change lives. No matter how far someone has fallen, with love and patience, they can be lifted up. Juma's journey shows that we all deserve love, and that sometimes it takes the kindness of one person to bring out the best in someone else. In the end, Juma's transformation wasn't just about becoming clean and healthy. It was about discovering the power of love, both for himself and for others. And that love, once found, can light the way for an entire village. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.